Hi, I'm Bill DeGiulio. Today I'd like to talk about how to use scales when improvising. Most times when guitarists first begin to learn to improvise, they use the pentatonic scale, which is a 5-note scale. Now the advantage of this is that it's very difficult to sound bad when using a pentatonic scale because all the notes fit perfectly with the chords that are used in standard blues and rock progressions. So there's not a lot of room to go wrong, basically. Now, when a player wants to expand their vocabulary and start to play over pop or jazz or other styles, that requires often the use of 7-note scales, like, for example, major scales, minor scales, or modes. Now, the challenge with that is that not all notes of the major scales or modes are treated equally. And I'll explain how to deal with that in a minute. Just take, for example, the C major chord, for example, okay? Or let's take a C major 7 chord. The C major 7 chord is, of course, using the notes C, E, G, and B. So what most jazz teachers or books would really recommend you do is to use the C major scale against a C major 7 chord, or what some people would call the C Ionian mode, which is primarily the same thing as the C major scale. Now the problem with that is a lot of players will start doing that and find it doesn't always sound good. I'll give you an example. Let me play a C major 7 vamp, and I'll play over the scale, or I'll play over the chords using a C major scale, and you'll see that it doesn't work exactly as you might think it would. Okay, I'll use the notes of the C major scale, but I won't use them in the proper way, so you'll see what kind of effect it gives. Now notice I used the C major scale, but it wasn't always musically successful. So I'll explain my way of looking at how to treat the use of scales when playing over chords. I like to think of my improvisation as, for example, a movie. Since I live close to Hollywood, California, I think this would be an apt analogy. So let's say we're going to cast our movie, which is our improvisation, and of course we're going to use actors. So let's say we're going to use our primary source of actors is going to be the C major scale. Now within that C major scale, not all notes are treated equally. I have my primary players, or my stars, of the C major scale. That would be the notes of the arpeggio, which would be C, E, G, and B. And my other notes of the major scale, D, F, and A, are my secondary people, or my supporting cast. So my stars get the most screen time and the most dialogue, and my supporting cast is important, but it doesn't get the same attention as the stars or my arpeggio tones. Now here's the way I want to incorporate my secondary notes into the major scale. So my supporting cast basically gets used as what are called neighboring tones or passing tones. For example, if I'm using C and E as my primary tones, I can pass through D to get to E. I don't stay on it for a length of time, I just move through it. So for example, if I'm playing this. So notice I'm giving C and E the primary attention, but I just moved through the D to get to the E. Now I can do that descending as well. Or I can use another set of notes, let's say G going down to E, but I'll pass through the F. So there I use the F as a passing tone. Now I can also use those notes as what are called neighboring tones. I can play the C, briefly move up to D, and then come back down to the C. That would be using the D as what's called an upper neighbor. Now I could do that also with the E, and I can use the D as what's called a lower neighbor. So notice I spent most of my time on the E, went down to the D briefly, then went back up to the E. So this is how I'm incorporating my supporting cast of the major scale as neighboring and passing tones, while still putting the spotlight, so to speak, on my stars, the C, E, G, and B. And what this does is gives my solo the sound that it really locks in with the chord. It really sounds like it fits. Unlike the first example I played, where I played a lot of notes that did not fit with the chord. I gave them too much emphasis. I treated my supporting cast with more emphasis than I did my stars. And the sonic result was that it didn't quite seem to fit properly. So I'll play some examples now. Just so you hear it in context, I'll play a C major 7 vamp, and I'll play only using the arpeggio tones. Now, what this does is it'll sound fine, all the notes work, but it'll be quite limiting melodically. Here's an example of that. Sorry, threw an A in there. Sorry, D. Now I'll play an example where I throw in the notes of the major scale that I didn't use. For example, I'll add my supporting cast, and using those notes as neighboring and passing tones. I'll expand my abilities even more, or my options even more, by using the other notes of the chromatic scale that are not in the major scale. So in other words, all the notes that are not in the major scale, but are part of the 12-tone chromatic scale, can be used as well. Now those can be thought of, I'll carry my Hollywood analogy even further, those can be thought of as my extras. Okay, so they're in the movie, they might not even have a speaking part, or they're seen only briefly, but they are a part of the movie. And those I will primarily use as passing tones. So for example, if I'm going from C to E, I can play, or better yet, so notice I'm still keeping C and E as my primary tones, but I'm passing through all those chromatic tones, and it's working because I'm only giving them a slight amount of time. I'm not landing on them and remaining there. Same thing if I'm going from E to G, for example. I can play, so I played not only F, which is in my supporting cast, but I went through F sharp or G flat, which is a part of my extras. So by passing through them quickly, I still maintain the importance of the E and the G, but I have a little more melodic flexibility. And I can use them as also as neighboring tones. So for example, if I'm focusing in on my G, that would be using the G flat as a lower neighbor. And that would work fine if I do it just as a temporary basis. So now I'll play over the same vamp using all 12 tones, but maintaining my hierarchy of notes. Arpeggio notes are the stars. Other scale tones are my supporting cast, and my remaining chromatic tones are my extras. So that would be an example of how to prioritize the notes I'm using when I'm improvising using a scale. Okay, just to sum up, my stars are my arpeggio tones. My supporting cast are the remaining notes of the scale I'm using, and the notes that are in the chromatic scale that are not in the scale, that are in the chromatic scale but not in the diatonic scale, are my extras. And I can use those, but only on a very temporary basis, by passing through them or using them as neighboring tones. So that would be my approach to using scales over chords. And this would apply also to other scales, for example, all the minor scales, the other modes, even variations or alterations of the modes. Those all use the same kind of concept. Because to play over a chord, we have to focus on the arpeggio tones primarily to give us that sound of the chord. Otherwise, it sounds like we're playing over the wrong chord or that we're lost in the progression. It doesn't fit with what's happening musically. I hope this has been of some help. If you have any questions or comments, criticisms, please leave them in the comments section below. and I'll be happy to respond to them. And if you've gotten something from this video, please like it, share it, and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more of my improvisational topics and discussions. And if you have any suggestions for future videos, please leave them in the comment section also below. Thanks very much for watching, and have a great day.